There's something I want to talk about that is not going to be easy to talk about. It's not going to be fun to talk about. It's going to be totally unlike any of my other videos. If you notice a lot of cuts, it's probably because I'm sick and I'm coughing, and that doesn't need to be in here. But I want to say before I get started that something that I think is a basic tenet of being a person is recognizing that the health and happiness of everybody is a fundamental human right. And if you don't believe that for whatever reason, if you believe that somebody living their life in a way that does not affect or hurt anybody else is part of your business and you think you need to have a say over it, don't watch the rest of the video. Don't bother commenting anything mean. I'm just going to delete it. I really don't care what you have to say. The only thing that needs to be said here is what's going on at these campuses, in particular Franklin and Marshall, because that's the one that I have personal experience with and I'm able to speak on. And I also want to emphasize that the things that I'm going to talk about, with the exception of what they themselves have put into this document as written fact, is my opinion. It is, for all intents and purposes, speculation. I frankly don't have any hard evidence to back this up, with the exception of the news articles that I'm going to show. But I want you to kind of take this with a grain of salt, but understand the severity of the things that I'm talking about and recognize that if I didn't believe these things happened, I wouldn't be here talking about them. So let's just get started. Okay, so every college and university in the U.S. is bound by the Campus Crime Statistics Act, and they all have to put out these reports every year going over the crime statistics of the 3 previous years. And part of that is also having the Title IX office, which is supposed to take care of things involving sexual assault or anything of that nature that goes on campus or involving students of that school. And I think that having these resources is very important. It's really the bare minimum. I think that it is necessary to have these kinds of resources available. However, the way Franklin and Marshall has handled things from, I don't have any personal experience, but from the things that I've heard, particularly from the F&M Survivors Instagram page, where people are able to share their stories about what they went through. I think that with how much it gets talked about, there's a lot of weight that comes with their claims, and I fully believe the victims here, and so I want to kind of talk about what's going on at F&M and compare it to the University of Maine, which is a school of 12,000 students in the case of UMaine, or 2,000 students in the case of F&M. So a 6 times difference. However, if we look at the rape statistics for the past 3 years, F&M has had 15, and UMaine has actually had the same. However, if we look at something like fondling, for instance, F&M has 25 and UMaine has 11. So again, considering the size of the campus, this is somewhat surprising, but I think that can also be due to the people who are coming on campus as students, and it can also come down to things like if alcohol or drugs were involved, the atmosphere surrounding campus, and I fully believe from my experience in both places that Orono and Bangor and Maine in general has a much more positive and healthy atmosphere than Lancaster or Pennsylvania as a whole. I don't want to make big claims about an entire state because there's just far too many nuances there to really say. But from my experience in each place, that's been my takeaway. I've lived in plenty of parts of Pennsylvania for far too long, and based on the things that I've seen, the atmosphere of Maine is significantly better than Pennsylvania's. And as I mentioned earlier, there is the F&M Survivors Instagram page, which is here. There are currently 114 posts on here, and there are some of them that are, not some of them, all of them are heartbreaking. They're all very tragic and just awful stories. In particular, this one involved somebody that I know personally, and it's such a sad story because this student was harassed in a fairly public way, and when she reported it to the Title IX office in the school, he ended up just leaving with no consequence. And I think that it's kind of hard to maybe pursue anything further as the school after this person has left, but they were just so unhelpful throughout the entire thing. So I feel so incredibly sorry for her and for anybody else who has gone through this at F&M or otherwise. You are valid if you're a victim. Like, this is such a horrible thing to have happen to you. I also want to talk about the hate crimes on campus. The University of Maine hasn't had any in the last 3 years, so cool, great. Kind of the bare minimum, but we can compare it to F&M, who in 2019, in my freshman year there was a single hate crime. It was in September. It was only about a month after school started. There were some Asian students whose dorm room door got carved into. The people put racial slurs on there, and the school, from the best of my memory, responded to it by saying, "Hey, please don't vandalize our property," and they left it at that. Nobody was held accountable for committing this wrongdoing, and it left a lot of students very unhappy, feeling very unsafe, and that's not something that anybody should ever have to feel, let alone on a school campus. It's really heartbreaking, and it's disturbing to hear of these stories, especially so early into the school year. 2020, there weren't any hate crimes because COVID happened. Nobody was on campus. 2021, there were 3, and I don't personally know the story behind any of these 3, but I do remember several related incidents, including Yik Yak, the anonymous social media app, coming back and people posting direct threats aimed at all sorts of different students on campus. We had a protest tree, it's just a big tree right in the middle of campus by the bookstore, and people could post flyers or posters or really whatever they wanted to say how they were feeling. And it was supposed to be that as long as it wasn't hateful or inciting violence or didn't fall outside the realm of free speech, how the U.S. legally defines it, then it was supposed to be okay. Well, people were coming onto campus, and I believe even students were taking part in this, and they were putting up threatening and hateful messages on the tree. There were white supremacist groups who were doing the same. And students were taking down some of these posters, which the school then responded and said, hey, you can't do that. That's not for you to do. So the school, for a moment, was considering, I believe, just getting rid of the protest tree altogether. There were several times that LGBT pride flags were put up around the tree, and they were taken down and replaced with things like Trump 2020 or Ben Shapiro, or something that was directly inciting violence and hate, saying things like, this land was conquered, not stolen. I remember that one in particular. And the school did nothing to stop this hateful message being put up around campus. And there were quite a few of these white supremacist groups who were coming onto campus. This also affected Millersville and Elizabethtown, with groups like the 100 Handers and Patriot Front. And it's something that, to the best of my knowledge, never went away, never stopped. I remember, I believe it was spring of 21, so last spring, one of these white supremacist groups was threatening to take over Old Main, which is the main administration and registrar building for the school. And to the best of my recollection, the public safety department, which is the school's police, responded and said, hey, please don't. And I don't remember anything coming of it, which is good, I guess. But I do remember then in fall, after Yik Yak and some of the other hate groups were kind of coming around again and threatening students, we were supposed to have this day of dialogue on campus, which was a staff coordinated day where we didn't have class and we all sat in the green and talked about issues on campus. There had already been lots of student protests regarding the feeling of not being safe on campus, and lots of other issues going on. And the school on this day put up a little stand. They brought out some speakers and a microphone, and a bunch of the administration just kind of went down a line saying, this isn't our fault. We're not going to do anything about it. It's not our problem. And they did invite students to come up and speak their minds as well. Lots of people were rallying around the students because they were talking about their own personal experiences of feeling unsafe or being threatened. And I remember President Altman coming by at some part during one of the protests, and rather than joining the protest with the students or showing any sort of solidarity, she used it as a photo op. She took some pictures, put them on Instagram, and that was the end of it. There was no more involvement. She just kind of came, took these pictures, and then left. And everybody was obviously incredibly disappointed. We all kind of expected more from her. It was a shame that she didn't help out a little bit more, or at least just acknowledge the issues, acknowledge our frustration, and give us some sort of solace that she was working to help or to change the situation. And speaking of protests and President Altman, during the protests regarding George Floyd's death, there was a man who got shot by police in Lancaster, and there were protests around that event. And this student, she was at one of the protests, and if I remember correctly, she was acting sort of as a medic for the people who were getting sprayed with like tear gas and stuff like that. And she got arrested on charges including felony arson and riot, and her bail was set at $1 million, which is absolutely just insane. It is mind-boggling that during a protest like this over somebody's death, somebody else can just be arrested and charged with things that had absolutely nothing to do with them, and set on $1 million bail. And the way President Altman responded was with this Instagram post where she just kind of acknowledged the situation and then ended it by saying, "Thank you, students, for creating a GoFundMe page to assist Kat and her family. Many of us in our community will be contributing." And that was all that she did. That was the most that we got. They raised quite a bit of money for her. If I remember correctly, the charges were dropped because they were all BS, and everything is hunky-dory. Great. It's still so incredibly disappointing and disheartening that in a city like Lancaster in Pennsylvania that is trying to portray itself as a nice, hospitable place, it's just a little city kind of tucked back in Amish country, but to have all of this awful stuff happening on campus with, again, the white supremacy groups and the students on campus being directly threatened, it's disgusting. It's awful. These are the reasons I was pushed away from F&M. I don't feel comfortable giving my tuition money to a school that's not willing to at least help its students feel safe on campus. I think that it's incredibly disgusting, and frankly, they're not even doing the bare minimum. So why should we as students be paying some of the highest tuition in the country? It cost me my last semester there, or last year for the whole year, it would have been over $80,000 for me to attend that school. And granted, I did have scholarships and everything else, but $80,000, that is an outrageous number to say. And I don't feel comfortable knowing that this school and its administration, who have shown that they don't care about students, are getting that money. What have they done to deserve it? Nothing. The school, from the beginning of its history, has been in debt. Things have been going wrong. Back in the 60s, we were talking about in a couple of my classes, and they even have newspaper clippings from it in the school's library about how when they first let black students on campus, they were treated as a science experiment. And they were put into special classes where it was supposed to just be them, and they would be essentially studied. Is horrific. It's disgusting. And at this point, I just feel like I'm repeating myself by saying this school doesn't deserve the support of its amazing students and its amazing faculty. I loved so many of the professors that I had there. If it weren't for these just absolutely awful events taking place, I would absolutely love to continue being a student and even be a professor there one day. Like, I was so excited to go to this school, only to find out that they really don't care. So I'm gonna wrap things up there. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Thank you for taking your time to understand the situation going on at F&M and in Lancaster. And really, I want the best for Franklin and Marshall, for its students, for its professors, for everybody there. I just want something to change. I want it to be a better environment. And if there's any way to bring that about that I can help out with, or that any of the students can help out with, I know everybody would be fully on board. So, have a great rest of your day.